Hello and welcome to Talking Reds, a Nottingham Forest podcast. This is part 3 in our special stat series, Into the Forest, or the one with the stats, sticking to our usual theme, where we will present a different angle or question each time, open it up for debate, and then hopefully agree, possibly disagree, potentially argue, or maybe even just reject the topic entirely. There will be, in this series, 5 episodes. This is going to be episode 3, and we're going to be taking it in turns throughout to present an idea to the panel and open it up for debate. So let's introduce our panel. We have Richard Spray, Paul Morley, Danscape, and the random pundit, Rafiq. And you know me, I'm Greg Oram. Good to be with you guys. Each speaker is going to have a chance to take the floor and present their question or idea. And the rest of us will be able to then chip in afterwards and ask questions and see if we can get to the bottom of it. We're aiming to keep these episodes quite short if we can, so strap yourselves in. And so, without further ado, let's get going with episode part number 3 with Paul Morley. Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, no thongs tonight, although worth noting, for the last 3 times we've won, I've worn the same boxer shorts inside out. So I think I might have stumbled upon a winning formula. So I'm going to keep that going. Right, so what am I going to talk about? I think when we first sort of floated the idea of this, I was wondering what could be a good topic to discuss. And obviously we're sat here recording this on the 16th of December, which nicely coincides with the very soon-to-be anniversary of Nuno's arrival. So last year on the 19th of December, which is my birthday, I was very sad when Steve Cooper got the bullet. It was not a nice birthday present. And I don't mind admitting that when the noises emerged that later that evening that Nuno was being lined up, I was a little bit underwhelmed, to say the least, and was feeling pretty frustrated. So, but thankfully, he has proved me wrong, and I just want to really delve into what he's done and just look at the Nuno effect, if you like, over the last 12 months.
Okay, over to you then. Keep going.
Yeah, 12 months on the Nuno effect. So that's my little intro slide. If we move to, if we think about the starting point, what did Nuno walk into, or what was the previous 12 months? What did that look like? And this is by no means a slight on Cooper. I've still got huge respect for what Cooper did. So this is not about Nuno being better than Cooper or sort of trying to compare and play the two off against each other. It's really just how has Nuno steadied the ship? What calmness has he brought, and what's the impact been, the positive impact of his arrival? So if you look at the situation he walked into, what we see on the screen is pretty much the previous 12 months. So the last 38 games of Cooper's reign. So it's not a season as such, but it's, if you like, it's pretty much from the resumption after the Winter World Cup through to when Cooper left. So I think it's roughly made up of 20 games or 21 games of the first season and 17 games of the second. And as you can see, we sat as the 17th best team in the league. Obviously, the bottom 3 I've sort of mixed together, obviously, as it spans 2 seasons of the teams that finished 18th, 19th and 20th in those respective seasons. So we pretty much solidly averaged a point a game. And you'll see that I've ranked it on points per game just because some teams have played 39 games, some teams played 37 in that particular calendar window. So I thought points per game was the best sort of or fairest way to rank that. As I say, comfortably we sit in 17th in Cooper's last 38 games over that period. If we move forward to look at what's happened since Nuno arrived. So had Nuno arrived at the start of the season, and we're talking about a 38-game season, we're now theoretically 37 games into that, 37th game being the Villa game on Saturday. And as you can see from the screen, we are the 11th ranked team in the league since Nuno arrived. Which I think, if you think back, the biggest question I had was, what's Nuno's remit going to be? Because I was, thinking, well, if it's just keepers in the league, then we've kind of already got somebody who's proved they can do that in Cooper. And I still maintain the fact that had Cooper stayed, I think we probably would have stayed up last season anyway. But what Nuno's really shown is obviously how he's evolved as this season, which we'll come on to. But if you look at it, say that over the course of that 12-month period, we are pretty much equal with Fulham. And ahead of the likes of Brighton, Brentford, I know, of having a good season this season, and you can work out where everybody is from the screen. Probably no real surprises in who's at the top and who's at the bottom, but he's basically made us into a comfortable mid-table team, even with all the noise that came shortly after his arrival with points deductions. This doesn't include points deductions, by the way. This is just points earned on the pitch. But clearly, the destabilising effect of all that noise that it had, and yet still, he's managed to establish us as very much a mid-table Premiership team or Premier League team in that 12 months since he arrived. So, how does that sort of play out in terms of what's the improvement compared to others? So, if we move on to the next slide, you can see that. If we're looking purely at table position, and this is again, if you like, the Cooper last 12 months versus the Nuno first 12 months, we've gone from being the 17th best team to the 11th best team. So in terms of the jump that we've made, it's the second biggest jump in the league behind Chelsea, who I think went from being the 15th best to the 4th best in that 12-month period. So obviously that on sort of reflection or on the face of it looks like we've made massive strides, and clearly we have. I guess the one slight caveat to that is obviously if you're already in the top 3 or 4, there's only so many places you can go. So clearly we have the ability to move up more places than some of the teams that are already at the top, which is why I've then on the right hand side of the screen got a slightly different sort of take on it, which is how much have we improved our position sort of as a factor of where we were. So if you look at Liverpool, who's second on that list, over the course of Cooper's last 38 games, they were the 4th best team in the league. In the last 12 months, they've been the 2nd best team. So they've basically doubled their position. So a factor change of 2. Similarly, at the bottom end, Villa had obviously a fantastic first year under Emery, and were the 3rd best team during that final 12 months of Cooper. Still doing pretty well. They're the 6th best team in the league over the last 12 months, but because they set themselves such a high bar, then they sort of come to the bottom of that sort of factor change piece by effectively having their league table position halved over that period of time. And you can see the likes of United, Brighton, who often really get talked about in glowing terms, have struggled. That was obviously a poor finish to De Zerbi's season, even though they've had a relatively decent time of it so far this year. They're still sort of down the bottom of that factor change. So that's table position is one way of looking at it. If we move to the next slide, slightly different metric used is points per game. Obviously, we had the ranking on the tables as points per game, but what has the points per game change been over that first year of Nuno compared to the last year of Cooper? And again, how does that compare to other teams in the league over the 2 same time periods? Again, we see Chelsea at the top, who've had a massive uplift in their points per game of nearly an extra 1 whole point per game, 0.98. We've added an extra 1/3 of a point and just a bit more per game since Nuno joined. And again, if you look at the right-hand side, the percentage uplift is just a slightly different way of measuring it. Most teams are in relatively the same position on the 2. There's a little bit of movement down towards the bottom half in terms of percentage uplift or percentage decrease. But broadly speaking, on those terms, again, a bit like the last tables we saw, aside from Chelsea, Nuno's made us into arguably the second most improved team over the 12 months of his tenure compared to where we were in the previous 12 months. So that really set us on a very solid footing for this current season. And I think if we move on to the next slide, we're now talking about we're moving away now from the 12-month look, but now looking at what has the difference been of having that pre-season of Nuno, full pre-season. How do we compare this season to where we finished last season? So, as I say, this is obviously recorded after the Villa game, prior to the Bournemouth West Ham game later on today. So that theoretically, if Bournemouth win that, then they could obviously move up this chart quite a bit. But you can see from these two slides, clearly we have massively improved compared to any other team in terms of league position. Way ahead. We've gone up 13 places. The next is Brentford and Bournemouth, who've improved 5 places from where they finished last season. And as a factor thing, again, I mentioned Liverpool obviously finished 3rd last season. They're now 1st, so they've improved by a factor of 3. Chelsea have gone from 6th to 2nd, factor of 3. Going from 17th to 4th as a factor of 4.25. So again, a little bit of caveat in that clearly we have more scope for improvement than some teams, but nonetheless, you can see compared to all the other teams that finished in the teens last year, we're way out shooting them so far this season. And then the next slide again has a comparison of this season versus last, but is now talking points per game. And if you look at points per game increase, both in the change and in the percentage uplift, we are, based on these stats, comfortably the most improved team in the Premier League this season compared to last. And just a little anecdote, looking ahead to the weekend, you see there on the right-hand side, the team with the 2nd best points per game percentage uplift this season is Brentford. So the game on Saturday could quite easily be billed the 2 most improved teams in the league this season facing off against each other. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. And then my final slide just is a nod to the fact that we have now achieved 100 points in the Premier League over the course of our return. So that's broken down into the 3 seasons, 38 points first season, 36 last season. Again, this is not including deductions, but on the field points. And obviously this year, 28. If you forecast that forward, the 1.75 points per game that we're getting this season, potentially, if we carry on this vein of form, would see us finish somewhere, 66, maybe even 67 points this season. So, a massive uplift from where we've been. And again, I've just broken down the points per game and the points that we've achieved by manager. You see Cooper in his 55 games managed to win 52 points. Nuno's literally 2 points behind that with 18 games in hand, theoretically. So again, just shows what a huge impact that he's had in terms of taking us to that next level, which I guess, huge credit to Marinakis for seeing that and for recognising that he was the right man to do that. I know Dan in his presentations talked a lot about similar things and whether Nuno's the right man and whether we can get into Europe. And I guess, the question is, can we dare to dream? Conference League feels like it's a possibility. Europa League, possibly. He's obviously proved that with Wolves. If we carry on and get 66, 67 points, who knows, maybe even the Champions League. I don't think we potentially can keep that going, but while we're here, it's nice to dream. So that's my short, sharp, sweet presentation on the Nuno, which hope you enjoyed, and happy to discuss any of the whys and wherefores of what I've just talked about.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Enjoyed that very, very much indeed. Really, really interesting. And when everything's put on the screen and you talk us through the details, it makes me think about some of the comments that I've heard this season from the likes of Alan Pardew. Forest are in a false position. And I've heard other people say, Forest are in a false position. I don't even know what that means. Is that like them saying, well, look, we said that Forest weren't going to finish any higher than 17th or 18th. So therefore, because they are doing so well, that goes against everything I've always thought. So it must be a false position. And I also thought that Jamie Carragher was lazy at the start of the season with, Forest are going to struggle this season. No one had really had a look. I mentioned Simon Jordan as well. No one had really had a look at what kind of activity we had been doing in terms of recruitment. And maybe it's a bit unfair to kind of criticize them. No one's going to go and do a deep dive into Forest in the way that we're doing for this series, especially because obviously we're fans. But I still felt that from the outside looking in, there was too many people just dismissing us as if to say, well, look, season 1 and season 2 was a struggle for them and I expect it to be the same. We said repeatedly, I mean, we as fans, if we could just kind of try and base our progression on Brighton. Well, actually, if you look at Brighton, I think it was their 3rd season in the Premier League, that they had that jump up from finishing in the lower half of the table to going up to, oh my God, aren't Brighton a good team? Oh my goodness me, Brighton are challenging for Europe, and so on and so on and so on. So it feels like we are managing to achieve something like that. But I guess what I'm trying to get to, Paul, is what two things, and there's probably more than two, there has to be more than two, but what two things are behind why we've improved so much under Nuno? What two things in your research and what you were looking at, has anything stood out to you to say, well, actually, you know what? That's a big reason as to why we've got the most improved team at the top, and that's another one. And then maybe the other guys will come up with some more.
I think in having a pre-season has made a huge difference, and that pre-season being settled, like you just said, recruitment-wise, I think if you think about the team that started the majority of games this season, or certainly if you think the team that started against Villa the other night, we've got two different faces to who finished last season in that starting lineup, which is Anderson and Milenkovic. I know we've had Jota's played a couple of games, and Moreno's played, obviously. But actually, I think apart from those four players, and obviously Morato coming off the bench, but by and large, we've not had a huge turnover. And I know there's a lot of talk towards the end of last season about our underlying numbers being good. And I think probably what you saw towards the end of last season, the eye test was telling you that Nuno's teams looked a lot more like a Premier League team than I think it was often said, wasn't it, that under Cooper we kind of felt like a Championship team playing an FA Cup tie every week. It was sort of battling against the odds and sort of scraping results. And then when Nuno came in, even though the points per game didn't uplift massively, there was definitely a shift in terms of how we were competing in games. And I think arguably he came into a situation where we were backs to the wall. We then had the points deduction, so it was all just about scrapping and survival. And when players are in that scenario and playing in that with that backdrop, then you're obviously not going to be playing with quite so much freedom and expression as possibly you'd want. And I think start of the season, clean slate, obviously strong pre-season. They can play without that fear, without that sort of backdrop of potential consequences of failure. And I think that's a massive factor in how we've seen ourselves progress this season, is that we've obviously had a couple of positive results early on that's just created that platform for us to play without the fear, express ourselves, still be disciplined like Nuno's teams are, but do it in a way that we feel comfortable and confident with. Like the Villa game, a prime example where we weren't just content to take a point. We went for the jugular after equalising, believed we could win the game, and that's probably not something we would have done historically last season, or certainly in the first season. We'd have shut up shop, taking a point, but that just shows the progression of where we're at.
Raph, over to you. Anything you'd like to ask Paul?
I think it's just to kind of delve a little bit on that factor of why we're saying Nuno's done better, and is that a lot's been made of the pre-season, but I do like the fact that you delved on the actual stability of the team. And looking at some of your stats, like Cooper's 50 odd games, over the whole of them, he was about a 0.93, I think, points per game. And it rounded, I always remember it, last 38 games, 38 points. It was a really, really good for statisticians, nice round 1.00 per game, which is really good for his final season to do. So you could see the fact that he was trending upwards, albeit at a slow rate. But given that he still had churn every single window, do you think it is more the factor of all of the club stability, none of the noise about PSR, stability in the hierarchy, the message from down top, Marinakis not going rogue the entire time, and those elements, and potentially stability, rather than actually Nuno's tactics and what he's been able to instill? Which do you think it's on a par, or do you actually think one's the larger factor of what is a dramatic uplift?
I think it's definitely a blend of a number of things. And as I said, right at the start, this is not about necessarily comparing or directly comparing the two managers and saying that one's better than the other. I think I think it's fair to say they both have very different, or have had different working environments to operate in. I think Nuno did have the noise last year. We had the tweet gate. We had obviously the points deduction. So I think he's just he just comes across as a very calming character. And I think Guy Mowbray said it when he interviewed him after the match of the day, didn't he? He said, "How do you remain so calm?" He said, "I'm not. I get bloody nervous and all the rest of it." But actually, just he exudes calm, and I think that obviously transmits to the players. I'm not saying Cooper was massively animated or anything like that, but I don't know, Nuno, whether it's just an experience factor, is just that sort of he's that sort of friendly uncle type, isn't he? That you have, and he's obviously got a few years more experience than Cooper. And maybe that's just he's able to just transmit that calmness to the players a little bit better. And I think as Dan said in his presentation as part of this series, Nuno's kind of been there, done that, and got the T-shirt when it comes to top half finishes in the Premier League. So again, he's got that experience to call upon, and hopefully the players, he can exude that to the players. Say, look, trust me, this method works. My track record tells you that, and therefore it's easy to get them to buy into it.
One thing I thought when he came in obviously at 20th of December last year, so he's got the January window creeping up very quickly, and recruitment is always a bit funny in the middle of the season. I just felt that once that window had closed and once he's kind of got going as our manager, things didn't take off as well as I'd hoped they would do. We stuttered a little bit. We had losses. We had some poor performances, which is why I went really quite hard on him. He was playing Origi a lot, which I just never really understood. So he was making choices with the squad that he had, which I found a little bit perplexing. And so the turnaround is quite dramatic, because it just goes to show, I think, that you get your recruitment right, you get your stamp on the club in terms of a full pre-season, and maybe have longer conversations to look at players that you really want to bring in. It also makes me think as well, like of Ross Wilson, who is working above him. Their relationship will have obviously blossomed. So I'm kind of looking at different reasons in the kind of recruitment and in the personnel as to why we've gone from, struggling in the league to performing really, really well. Going back to what Dan was presenting in episode 2, and how Nuno took Wolves to 2 7th place finishes, and the second of those was whilst he had a European campaign under his belt, then I just see the trajectory, can't even speak, that we're on, and I feel so good about the journey in us possibly finishing 7th or higher. And I know there's lots and lots of competition, but I guess the question I want to kind of pose to you guys is, could we be in danger of losing Nuno at any point? Because, there are teams out there that quite often are in need of a manager. And if he's raising eyebrows and if he's doing a good job again with a team like Forest, we know that things didn't go so well for him at Spurs. And I felt he was a little bit harsh there. I felt they didn't give him the time. But, potentially down the line, is he possibly someone he might be earmarked for one of the so-called bigger clubs? So I'm just kind of throw that into the mix. But I also want to get some ideas from Dan and Richard. Maybe they want to come in as well.
Yeah, it's probably a really stupid thought. In response to your question, I think there was some rumblings about that last year, right? If I'm not mistaken, he may have been on the short list for Bayern Munich. So I think, Greg, we talked about that in one of the earliest episodes we did, where we were just kind of like, okay, is this guy even going to be here next year? Because I hope he is. I'm just thinking this is probably a completely useless sort of direction to take this in, but it's the idea of when you think about the way that Cooper influenced this club in terms of the position that he had and the way that he elevated us and helped get us to the Premier League. He holds sort of this mythical sort of figure now within our Forest lore. I guess I'm curious, what would it take for Nuno to surpass him? It's really not that important in the landscape of things, clearly. Winning matches, playing well, doing what we're doing now, getting ahead of schedule, as it were, in terms of our progression. I'm just curious because I love Steve Cooper, but I have to be frank, I kind of enjoy Nuno a little bit more. I think there's a little bit more quality on the pitch, evidenced by, I mean, there's a lot of factors obviously that impacted what Cooper was dealing with as well when he came in that first year and a half or so. But I'm just curious what you guys think, because I personally think he's been incredible, and the kind of guy he is, the way that he connects with the community, the smile on his face and the love that he clearly has for what he's doing right now. I'm just wondering, what your guys' thoughts around that piece, because it's not necessarily a Cooper versus, Nuno comparison, like you said, Paul, but I just think of where we're at, because I've heard a number of people on our show say they actually love Nuno now. He's their favorite manager aside from Cloughy and Cooper. So he's elevated up in that top ranking, if you will.
Go on, Raf.
I was going to say I said that actually as well. I like Nuno's my pretty much number 2. But to that point, I don't want to hijack this from Paul's kind of session, but for me, I'm never going to forget what Cooper did for us, of basically 2 full-blown miracles that he delivered at this club. And for Nuno, as much as I think he is such a wonderful human being, let alone manager, he's just such a great human being. I love him personally for that quality, but to get the whole fan base to put him on that kind of legend category, I think it's European qualification. He gets us to Europe quickly, i.e. this season or next, and the speed of the turnaround, I think that's what gets him legendary status. As far, I don't know, Paul, what would you?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think that's right. I think it would be that if he manages that achievement, it will be pretty, very much akin to the turnaround that we saw under Cooper for promotion and then maintaining Premier League status. So, yeah, I think like you say, Cooper is always going to have a very, very special place in Forest fans' hearts for forever and a day. But what we also learned from Cooper is that nothing lasts forever. And going back to your question, Greg, what happens if Nuno gets an approach from somewhere else? It's interesting. I don't know whether. I don't know, and this may be just me being naive. I can't see one of the top 6 in this country going for Nuno just because of the perceived style that he plays. I think, I don't think he's fashionable enough, or the way that we play are fashionable enough to satisfy the top 6. And that's probably why his face didn't quite fit at Spurs. But maybe it might be abroad. I think what I would say is that what fills me with confidence or less fear that if Nuno did, go off to pastures new, he's absolutely going to leave us in a place that makes us attractive to someone else of a high caliber coming in. It's certainly, the only reason he would leave is if he's done a fantastic job, or either the way he would get poached, if you like, is if he's done a fantastic job and he's left us in a great position. So, we should be able to, if that happens, cherry pick who we want to then continue Nuno's work, which I think takes away the fear factor of that happening.
Danscape, over to you.
I think I relate better to Nuno than I did Cooper. Cooper used to be able to behave in a way after games and in his interviews and all that, which I found like, how do you do that? How do you come out after that 5-0 defeat to Fulham and still sound so positive and whatever it is, encouraging and belief in yourself? And I think Nuno's a little bit more relatable insofar as I think last season he just could not be arsed with all the stuff off the pitch. I think he just wants to get on with the football. I think he wants to be left alone with all the other stuff. And I think that's why he probably isn't necessarily looking for a top 6 job and things like that. I think he's been there, he's tried it. All the noise that came with it, all the superstar players and all that sort of stuff, I think that was well outside of what he wants to get on with. So I think that's part of it. And I think he's a right fit for us right now. My question and my worry is what happens in the future when expectations rise. So if we finish top half this season, is that then the benchmark by which we're suddenly judged? Like, right, well, we finished top half last season. So if we have a slightly slow start to the following season, are we already suddenly jumping on his back? And because of the style of football, as Paul touched on, it's built on defence and stuff. So a poor run of results will attract more criticism quickly because there's not those bright sparks of dominating games and creating lots of chances and allowing players to just go and do what they want. So I think, unfortunately, it's not a good way to look at it. Sort of looking for the problems in the future. But I think at the minute, we're on such a trajectory. Can't say it. We're on the right route that he's too much talking. He's on the right route to get us to a much better position than we expected to be. And you just know what football's like. The expectation will just rise with whatever happened last season. And that's where I think, it becomes difficult, because that's not just the fans. That will be the owner as well, who we know is very ambitious. So just let's just enjoy him while he's here for that reason, because I think he's the right fit for us right now. And hopefully we get the achievements along the way that just stop all that other noise that will, I think, change the whole dynamic behind the scenes.
Well, and that's why I sort of cautionary mentioned Villa in one of those stats where they were the bottom in terms of league position change over the last 12 months, and that they punched so far above Unai Emery done such a fantastic job in the 12 months and sort of effectively turned into the third best team in the country in his first 12 months, and that now they're the sixth best team in the country in his last 12 months, which is by no means a bad place to be in, but actually you kind of halved your success. So you're absolutely right to call that out. We need to be mindful of there will be fluctuations, there'll be ups and downs. But yeah, I think, like you say, he's absolutely the right man for now. And ultimately, as we've said many times in the last few weeks, and seemingly saying more and more after every game, just enjoy this whilst we've got this brilliant sort of feeling at the minute, and this sort of crest of a wave. Let's ride it for as long as we can, because there will be a downside at some point. But let's just enjoy these times while we can, and appreciate what Nuno's brought to us.
Thanks, Paul. That just about wraps up episode 3. If you have liked what you've listened to or seen, please do hit the like button. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe. We're going to try and throw more Forest content your way. And this series, as a series of 5, 2 more to come. So please stick with us, and we'll see you very, very soon.